Hi folks, it's Thinking Slow here. So we've had a bit of a break over July, but we wanted to come back with a short episode about the recent announcement of the appointment of Professor Michie to the World Health Organization and look at what that means for the direction of travel for the WHO. I think this is an important piece in the puzzle of where this is all heading. I guess you won't be surprised to think that we believe this is heading in towards totalitarian one world government, and I think this appointment underlines that fact. And before getting into the main part, thanks very much for the people who have signed up to Patreon. This is the link to the Patreon subscription, and if you'd like to support the work of the channel, you can put the video on pause and spend a couple of minutes signing up to this. So that would be very much appreciated. Thank you. So moving on then, this is the announcement of the appointment of Professor Susan Michie to the World Health Organization's Technical Advisory Group for Behavioural Insights. That's quite an Orwellian title for that advisory group, and that's not accidental because actually that advisory group, based on what we saw in the UK, will be quite Orwellian. It will do Orwellian things. So looking at the experience of what happened in the UK, so in the UK there was overall scientific advisory group called SAGE, and underneath that were specific subgroups dealing with different parts of the COVID response. And one of those, perhaps the most, for my money, troubling was a subgroup called SPI-B, which is Behavioural Insights, and it's essentially applied psychology. So one of the early documents they released were the minutes of one of the meetings of SPI-B, and we've put a link to that document at the end of this so you can verify this is all official government material. But here they explicitly said they were going to use fear. Here it is: use media to increase sense of personal threat, which means fear basically. And this was one of the options evaluated for complying with the government policies. And we'll come into this a little bit, but for this group, they decided the acceptability of that was very high, or just high to be fair, and there would be few or unknown negative consequences for that. Now, that's quite a major value judgment that all of a sudden a government deliberately manipulates people using fear in order to get people to comply with their policy objectives. And remembering at the time there was absolutely no evidence for this social distancing really preventing any kind of spread of infection. In fact, the early evidence didn't confirm this at all, that actually it made no difference. And also the early evidence at this stage was things like lockdowns would actually cause more damage than they did good. But even given that real world evidence, this advisory group is deciding to manipulate people through the use of fear into complying with government policies, even though those policies have no real scientific basis at all. So the work of that group then led to this kind of fear campaign. This was a mass advertising campaign putting out many posters like this, which actually worked to deter people from going into hospital, which has then created all kinds of knock-on problems, and again problems that are significantly larger than COVID itself. So this was part of the policy work of SPI-B, of which Professor Susan Michie was a member. And I think our suggestion is you can then expect to see this kind of approach rolled out on more of a global basis via the WHO. And the use of fear essentially is a well-known tactic from totalitarian regimes to manipulate and manage the population and coerce them. And the definitive guide to sort of totalitarian regimes, more or less, is from Joost Meerlo, who wrote very extensively about the fascist regime in Germany and the sort of applied psychology that they would use. And this is one particular paragraph that's worth just maybe going through. Totalitarian leaders, whether of the right or of the left, know better than anyone else how to make use of this fear of living. They thrive on chaos and bewilderment. The strategy of fear is one of their most valuable tactics. So it's well known in this literature that using fear is a very powerful tool to manipulate the population into doing what the authorities want them to do. And that was really brought quite kind of right up to date through another document which was produced by another member of SPI-B, who's another professor of psychology, a guy called Stephen Reicher, who also we don't particularly like, to be honest. And within that document, which is called Together Apart, although they spend most of the document dancing around the issue of the benefits of collectivization, at one point further into the document they actually come up with what this is really all about. And then this is the direct quote. So far the chapters in this section have concentrated primarily on the positive side of collective behavior, solidarity with others in the community, and identification with and adherence to authority. Now, again, this brings right up to date those observations from Just Merlo that, you know, collectivization ultimately is about, the other side of collectivization, obviously, is that you follow the instructions that you're given by authority. And this document called Together Apart, which was published right at the beginning of COVID, they see this as a strong positive. So, you know, authoritarians will also understand the benefits of this collectivization. It's to get people to do as they're told by the authoritarians. And that is the theme that goes right through the work of SPI-B, and we expect that to go into the WHO now. Almost as a side issue, Professor Michie is a lifelong communist, and as well as being a communist, she happens to be extraordinarily wealthy in her own right, which is then makes it, of course, much easier to destroy living standards for everyone else through Marxism. And she's one of three beneficiaries of a £52 million estate, which came from Dame Anne McLaren, including a world-famous Picasso painting within that estate, which was split between Susan Michie and two siblings. And Susan Michie herself is the granddaughter of the second Baron of Aberconway and Lady Aberconway. So a typical Champagne socialist, financially fully secure, regardless of what's happening in the job market or job prospects, but at the same time quite happy to destroy everybody else's ability to earn money in order to survive. And for her, that will have almost no implication, both due to professorship and due to an enormous inherited wealth. And as we said in other films, we're deeply suspicious of the WHO. YouTube deleted our video on the WHO after quite a number of people had seen it. But one thing we did do is go back through the archives of WHO and the United Nations. And within the organization, you will find people who explicitly have an objective of creating one world government. And this is a direct quote from Robert Mueller, who was the Assistant Secretary General, spent 40 years within the United Nations system. And this is his quote. You know, he wants to see the United Nations with much more power, especially powers of implementation, legislation, and vastly increased resources, commensurate with the tasks of the 21st century or a United States of the world. So, you know, this is why we are suspicious of the UN and sort of by association the WHO, because there are globalists in there that believe that there should be essentially one world government, and who do not recognize the agency of individuals to make their own medical decisions, and do not recognize the sovereignty of nation states to make their own decisions. So everything will have to be managed by this group of experts in Geneva, and coerced, both people and nation states coerced by this one world government. And then, just summing up, basically, we think the appointment of Professor Michie is another piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle, as we've been saying for a couple of years now, is a move towards totalitarian one world government. If you look at all of the things that are going on, that's where all of this points to. So, the unethical use of applied psychology, which is what we looked at now, obviously the use of technology, particularly vaccine passports, to punish non-compliance, the link between government and big tech in order to deplatform and silence any dissent, the rule by experts, the science we must follow, regardless of whether people see value to that or whether they can actually adduce any evidence to prove that what they're proposing makes sense, which they couldn't, and we saw that over and over again. SPI-M models were endlessly wrong right throughout the whole pandemic. And then an important element of this totalitarian one world government are show trials, which is what we're seeing now. So any dissident really is just punished without any kind of real due process, and that's happening quite a lot. So I think that was what we wanted to say. If you'd like to help us out on the channel, please think about going across to Patreon. This is the link here, was on the first page, Patreon Thinking Slow. All the links to all the documents we mentioned here are on this page here, and hope you found this interesting. We'll be producing some more material in the coming week. Thank you very much. Bye.